All right, questions. Mostly about American history, but there's a reading due Thursday, chapter 1. Anybody get started already? Reading? That's what Wednesday's for. Or if you don't have a 7:30 class, you got Thursday morning. So. And then a week from Thursday is our test. We have class this Thursday, and then next Monday, no class. All of us guys be up at the tent working in 15 minutes next Monday. So there's no class Monday, and then Thursday will be the test. So we'll talk about the test Thursday, and it'll be a week later that you actually come and take it.
Will we be moving our classes from Monday to Wednesday, or just?
No, as far as I know, it's just no classes. I hope it was no. I'm all excited about it. So it is, unless I misunderstood, it's just no classes. So if that happens, then we'll have class Wednesday, and then the test on Thursday. So Thursday I'll be gone. So somebody else will come and give you the test. I don't know who yet, but they will hand you the piece of paper and sit and wait for you to get done. So if you do come across questions as you study, I'll answer them, but I'll be gone. I'm leaving Wednesday 3:30ish or so.
Next Thursday the test is?
Yes, a week from Thursday. Okay, so we'll talk about it Thursday. I'll give you some indication of what's on it. It's kind of an insult to a teacher when some student says, what's on the test? What things are important? The implication is that the teacher's been spending lots of time talking about unimportant things that don't count for anything. You think I would cheat you and make you pay for something that's not important? So anyway, I will give you some indication about how to study and to prepare for it, but I don't know that I'm very good at it, but I try to make it obvious the things that are important. But we'll see. We will see about that. So, okay, let's review some things that are important. Which emperor converted, very loosely speaking, Rome to Christianity? Constantine. Which emperor was very efficient in the use of duct tape? Well, we talked about him duct taping the empire together. Nero. Some allusion to his chicken? No. Diocletian. He's the one that made some political reforms that held the structure together. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird. I always think of duct tape when I think of Diocletian. That kind of the hillbilly repair job to the empire. No, that was Constantine. He brought it back together for a short time and then splits back up. All right, Diocletian. Why are the barracks emperors referred to as the barracks emperors? Morgan? Yeah, they all came up through the military, generals that took over by force. What family of languages do we get out of Rome? The Romance languages. How beautiful. All right. What entity, let me back up. The fall of Rome catapulted Western Europe into this dark ages of ignorance and backwardsness. What entity held it there? Anybody else? This is an oversimplification, I think, but I think it's, and lots of times it's good to be over simple with things. If you think of the simplest way to think of something, often that's a very good way to do it. So, hi. Somebody else. If you're completely lost, just look at the last couple of things we talked about and guess one of those. Right? Yes. The Catholic Church. Okay. The follow-up question: what facet or what thing about the Catholic Church gave it the ability to do this? Okay. That's which allowed them.
Well, preserve the ignorance, so it allowed people not to be able to read and be educated for themselves.
Okay, that's true. There's one little piece that we need to add in there. Yes.
They convinced people that they had to be a part of the church in order to get saved.
Yes, that ignorance they used to be able to convince people that you had to be part of the church to be saved, which then gave them lots of power. All right. Think about the things you do for your boss, and all he has the ability to do is control your paycheck. Okay. And if you have some guy that controls whether or not you go to heaven or hell, it's really hard for us to put ourselves in that mindset. But if you really were convinced that Pastor Dameron, for you, held the keys to heaven, right, that gives them a lot of authority. Right? And the Catholic Church put themselves in that position, basically. And it allowed them to stifle all kinds of things and maintain that ignorance. So again, there are other factors involved, but that is at least a contributing factor here, solidifying Europe in this Dark Ages. All right, what is the hierarchical structure of government that is the dominant form of government in the Middle Ages? Somebody who didn't answer yet. Feudalism, F-E-U-D-A-L, feudalism. So anyway, structure, the term hierarchical structures, you can talk about our government as a hierarchical structure with the president at the top and governors, on down the line, but very, very different from that. The guy at the top here technically owned everything, and he would give part of the land away to somebody below him, and he would rule that land very freely. And then that guy would have too much land to control directly, so he would partition it off. And you get this kind of ladder of each guy with less and less authority. And there were definite obligations both directions. The guy above that was giving the land to somebody, there were certain things he was required to do, and the guy below, there were certain things he was required to do. Anybody familiar with the Magna Carta and King John? Everybody raise your hand and say, yes, I know all about that. Of course. Right? There, the king, the guy at the top, needed to go to war. And the agreement was that the second level of guys had to supply a certain number of troops to the king. And they said, we're not going to do that unless you sign the Magna Carta. And it came directly out of this feudal structure, the way things were arranged. So, all right, feudalism, that was the dominant structure. All right, when you think of crusades, give me the short, what should come to mind? You can restrict it down to 2 words, potentially. Michael?
Military campaigns.
Military campaigns. All right, somebody give us a few more details. Were they against the Muslim terrorists along the Barbary Coast? Or do we save those for Jefferson to deal with? I don't know if anybody's answered over there. Military campaigns, give us any type of details beyond that. Where did they go? Successful, not successful? Okay, generally speaking, not successful, yeah. The first one you could argue some success. The other, maybe the Third Crusade, some success, but a very painful success. All right, where did they go? Russia. That's coming. Oh, come on. Should I just randomly pick somebody? I'm looking for somebody who hasn't answered yet to volunteer. I know Miles hasn't, but he hasn't volunteered yet. I'm trying to let somebody volunteer. I hate to embarrass people. Well, maybe I don't. I've been in class. When the teacher makes you answer a question, it keeps you awake. So who wants to... We got another Michael and a Joseph and a Thomas that haven't answered. Holy, I thought you said the wilderness for a second. The Holy Lands. This part of the world right here. In fact, these little, whatever colors those are, those were some countries that were carved out in that first crusade. All right? So military campaigns. All right, as we left the Crusades, I mentioned a couple of results from the Crusades. There are lots of things we could talk about here, but I tried to pick out just a couple of the important ones. What is meant by the idea of an exchange of ideas? What do I mean by that? An exchange of ideas. Or do you just have that written down in your notes and you're hoping I didn't get further than that on the test? Just list some results. What do I mean by an exchange of ideas? Thomas is wanting to go again? We'll come back to you. Jasmine? And then maybe Joanna after, behind you. We'll see. Okay, yeah. There was, mostly it's the people living in Europe in the Dark Ages getting exposed to the world and all the knowledge and teachings of the rest of the world. So mostly it's ideas coming in this direction, all right? But we do have an awakening of the intellect and the understanding of lots of people here in the Middle East. So exchange of ideas, exchange of goods. What do I mean by that? Joanna? Okay. The people in Europe predominantly, again, are exposed to all kinds of products that they didn't even know existed for the most part before. Imagine if all you ever did was shop in the bookstore and then someone took you to Walmart. Or you can even go to Kmart, right? And you'd say, wow, there's a lot of things here. And then if you got pulled back and it could only go in the bookstore again. Right? That's kind of the withdrawal that some of these people went through. So an exchange of goods, all of a sudden there's people in Europe predominantly are aware of all kinds of products that are available. And that ties in we're going to talk next about the exploration and discovery. The desire for those goods is a very important factor in that, but we'll get there. And then the last thing I mentioned is a modification of feudalism. That feudal structure begins to be modified. And we get eventually out of it what we think of as a monarch, a king at the top, a kind of a different structure. All right, questions on any of that? All right, we're going to get right up on the edge here of where we actually begin to see things happening in America, since it's American history. The next topic to look at is exploration and discovery. Exploration and discovery. The first thing we'll look at is 6 things that prepared Europe for this. We have Europe that's in the dark. It really is kind of an amazing thing. We have Europe for about 1,000 years that's living in this dark ages, really not traveling a whole lot. Go back and read some of the writers from the Dark Ages and you'll understand why nobody bothered to learn to read. I'm kind of joking. But it's in this dark time. And they go from that to very little travel, going to the Middle East and being exposed to all these new things. To here, this is a tough map to get your mind wrapped around. Here's Europe. Here's North America and South America. But all those lines and these green and peaches sections, those are all places where they go and colonize and travel. In a very short window, really, they go from not traveling anywhere for the most part to traveling all over the globe and just a massive amount of exploration and discovery. So what we're going to do here is look at... No, he needs power. Look at some things that caused that change. What caused them to go from never going anywhere to all of a sudden exploring the entire world. So, all right, I've got it split down into 6 things. And you could split these up differently, and these are definitely interrelated. But 6 things here. The first one we've already talked about is the Crusades. The Crusades. They were definitely a contributing factor. Everything from the desire for products that weren't available to the feudal system being changed to even in some cases the military developments and advancement that were used in the Middle East get carried over to some of the conquests. But the Crusades, definitely a contributing factor. All right, the second one, which goes hand in hand with the Crusades somewhat, is a desire for new trade routes. All right, these people in Europe that wanted new products, other people would come along and bring them to them. All right, these merchants and traders, and these merchants and traders wanted, just like today, they were trying to make money. That's not an evil thing. All right, please don't believe our president. It's not evil to want to make money. If you ever get to that point, just refuse your paycheck. Just tell your boss, it's Steak and Shake, you know what, I'm just here to feed humanity. I don't want to get paid. Better than that, give me your paycheck. Don't refuse it. That profit motive isn't evil. The love of money is evil, but we have to work to eat. So anyway, these merchants here who were trying to bring these products in, they were looking for better ways to get them into there. And especially the products from way out here around India and the Far East, they're trying to figure out how to get those products more cheaply here. All right. Some people do try to go overland. Anybody know a famous guy who traveled overland? We play a game in the pool with his name. Marco Polo traveled overland. Some people would travel through the Mediterranean, then cross the land here and come across that way. But they were looking for new ways. All right, that was at the heart of this exploration. Another reminder of the benefits of the free market. Right? It wasn't a government program, right? Despite what our president says. So desire for these new trade routes, that was a major contributing factor. These merchants trying to find new ways to get there. Now, for us, we can look at this and ask, were they stupid? Okay, come on. Selling this way to get to India? Anybody know the answer to that question? They weren't stupid. Maybe ignorant. They didn't realize that North America was there, but that's very different than stupid. Why would they take off this direction to get to India? Not deep here. Gregory?
At that time, they strongly believed the world was flat, but I think they believed that if he went around, he would be able to come to the other side of India.
Yeah, they didn't realize any of this was here. So they thought, just as they started hitting the islands, in fact, Columbus talked about the Indians because he thought he was over here. So they realized they thought it was much smaller than it was. So they were trying to get to India by going around the world. They just hit a small little a speed bump or something there in the way. So, all right. So, desire for trade routes. So those guys that all went out, it wasn't just I'm bored today. Let's sail across and see what we hit. They were looking for a way to get to India and China and bring products back. Once they do find these routes, there's an amazing amount of money that can be made. There are times where if some guy sent out 4 ships and one of them made it back full of goods, he would make a profit. That's not too bad. Imagine if 2 made it. All right, so desire for trade routes. Third thing here, we have the Crusades and the desire for trade routes. The third thing is the rise of nations and nationalism. We've talked about the feudal structure shifting and changing. As we get towards the end of the Middle Ages, we see nations as we think of them beginning to form. People in the heart of the Middle Ages didn't so much think of themselves as Englishmen or Frenchmen. They would just be some guy in this ladder, and whoever the guy above him was, there was some loyalty there because he had sworn an oath to complete his obligations to this guy. But he really didn't care who was at the top. There was no real sense of belonging to a nation. All right, that begins to change. All right, and people began to think of themselves as Frenchmen or Spaniards, and the guy at the top begins to expect loyalty all the way down the line. All right, and even the guys at the bottom would pledge loyalty to the king. All right, so we see that shifting there of the feudal structure, and nations, as we think of them, beginning to blossom and partake. And some of the motivation here for the exploration was a national pride issue. There were the Spanish, they wanted to establish the colonies first. They wanted a corner on the market. Or the English, they wanted to control the trade. So the monarchs would get involved in some of this as that national competition. So the rise of nations and nationalism. All right, the fourth thing I have to give you here. This would be more motivation of some of the individual explorers. They went just for the excitement. This was all of us guys can appreciate that. If my wife once asked me, if you had a chance to go to the moon, would you do it? I said, of course. Who in their right mind would turn it down? It's just, oh, what about me and the children? Well, we've got life insurance. The excitement and the challenge, sorry girls, that does motivate us. That's why girls play hard to get sometimes, because they know it's going to drive you crazy. Right, girls? So, all right, but anyway, that desire for adventure. There were some of these explorers that it was the challenge and the excitement and the danger motivated them. Now we're talking about the individual sailors at that point and the captains of the ships and some of those people. They went for that. So, all right, number 5 is the Renaissance, a rebirth of learning. A rebirth of learning. I talked about, the ignorance of the Middle Ages. As that gets stripped away and knowledge begins to blossom again, it contributes directly with navigation and things like it, but just a rebirth of learning. I want to just very, very quickly mention the 2 main parts of the Renaissance. There's two phases of it, or 2 parts of it. The first is the Italian Renaissance. Can anybody guess which nation the Italian Renaissance is centered in? Italy. Who was that? What's that? Turkey. Oh, so Norway. We're close. All right. So focused in Italy, and this is what I have as a description of the Italian Renaissance. Mostly intellect without God. It was an intellectual revival, but no real spiritual component to it. Now, if you look at the paintings, there's paintings of the Sistine Chapel, of the Last Judgment of God. And if you ever get a chance to go and see it, it's amazing. And you see God, you see paintings of religious things, but it wasn't like there's this great awakening of people that brought about these things. It was just the art and for the sake of the art. All right, so an intellectual, artistic revival, but no real religious component other than just surface features. So, a couple of the comments about the Italian Renaissance. A lot of the Italian Renaissance was reviving the Greek and Roman works, the statues and paintings and things harkening back to that era. And there's lots of famous artists from the Italian Renaissance. Matthew mentioned Michelangelo. Anybody know anybody else? There's a stupid cartoons about some turtles that stole some of the names. Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. There's a whole host of very famous architects or artists here out of the Italian Renaissance. All right, so Italian Renaissance, intellect and art without any real religious component, although often they are painting or making statues of religious things. So, all right, the other facet is the Northern Renaissance. The Italian Renaissance, if you want some years for that, it's about 1300 to 1600. The Northern Renaissance is a little bit later in history, more right around 1500. The Northern Renaissance. 13 to 1600, roughly. The Northern Renaissance, it was to the north of Italy. Hence the north. It focused in Germany and Northern Europe, that part of the world. And this had a definite religious component. In fact, it's hard to completely disentangle the Northern Renaissance and the Reformation because they are so much intertwined. A lot of the intellectuals that we throw into the Northern Renaissance were people who were providing a Greek New Testament, a quality Greek New Testament, so that everybody could translate from that into their own language. I said it's hard to really separate the Northern Renaissance and the Reformation, although we do. I mean, we try to look at them as 2 separate entities, but the Northern Renaissance had a very serious religious component to it. Okay, so the Renaissance. this revival of learning definitely contributed here to the exploration and discovery.
What was the time for the Northern Renaissance?
1500, a little bit later than the Italian. Anybody know any famous men from the Northern Renaissance? Martin Luther. And he's one of those that, does he go in the Reformation or the Renaissance? He tends to get thrown into the Reformation, but you can go either way. A guy who was involved in printing. Gutenberg. Anybody know the name Erasmus? He's the one who provided the Greek New Testaments to be translated. So, all right. So the names there might not be as famous as some of the others, but a lot of these guys were very religious and seriously religious, and also had to get thrown into the Northern Renaissance. So, all right, the Renaissance, this rebirth of learning, it definitely contributed to this exploration and discovery. All right, the last thing is what we've said is intertwined with the Northern Renaissance is the Reformation. And we will, the Reformation, this is the description I've got for this. The stranglehold of the Catholic Church being broken by biblical Christianity, or something along that line. People began to have the Bible in their own language, began to read it. And that, if you read in there that you're saved by grace through faith, and it doesn't mention the Pope, then when the Pope excommunicates you and condemns you to hell, you're not that worried about it, because you're thinking, he can't do that, right? So as biblical Christianity spreads, as the knowledge of the Bible and people reading the Bible spreads, that stranglehold is broken, and the freedom that comes with that definitely contributed to this exploration and discovery. I want to look at a few things here in the Reformation, not a lot of detail, but just a few things here that I think we should mention, even in a quick survey like this. The first is that this Reformation is especially strong in England. You can see components of it in Germany and France and other places. But England was especially known, or it had an especially strong effect in England, maybe is a good way to say it. One reason for that is there was a lot of translations of the Bible into English. The Bible being provided for the people in their own language, and them being able to read it. There were translations other places into the common language, but it was much more widespread here in England. Let me give you a couple of the famous ones. The earliest one was in 1382, the Wycliffe Bible, John Wycliffe. This one's amazing. It was before the printing press, so they were hand copied. Pastor Dan was wanting us to pass out 45 tracts. Imagine if you said you had to write them by hand and not type them. I mean, hand write them. You'd be a little more careful. You wouldn't leave them on the tables or in the sink in the bathroom. You would give them to people. So anyway, handwritten. That's a kind of amazing thing. All right, so that was the Wycliffe Bible, 1382. Jump ahead a little bit. You get to the Tyndale Bible. That's 1526. This one was printed, so we have much wider spread of this thing.
How do you spell that?
Tyndale, Tyndale. 1526. This is the Bible. You might have heard of a Bible that the King of England eventually commanded one be chained to every pulpit in England. It was this Bible. It was after Tyndale had been killed, martyred, that this happens. But his Bible, the king here making sure that there's one available in every church at least, right, which was a drastic improvement. All right, that was 1526. The next one is the Geneva Bible, 1559. Anybody know anything about that Bible? Geneva? Switzerland? Geneva? Let Matthew answer again.
It had many notes and things that were added to it, which would cause it to be banned in some countries due to the Islamic.
Okay, that's not what I was thinking of, but that's true. It did have lots of notes, which contrasted with the next Bible. It was a Bible used by the Pilgrims when they came over. And also it had verses in it. It's kind of it's handy for memorization. Pastor Aaron said we got to memorize 45 paragraphs or a certain number of words. It's it's useful. Not divine, not inspired, but useful. So, all right, the last one is the King James in 1611. Matthew mentioned the notes in the Geneva Bible. This one didn't have those. It was just the text, which then allowed it to be used by all kinds of different people. And it was a quality translation. We use it today for that reason, very quality. So anyway, the point is, England had lots of these translations, and much more so was saturated with God's Word and actually reading the Bible as opposed to other places. All right, so we have the Bible in England and this Reformation being especially strong there. Next, I want to look at a little bit of history in England that involves the Reformation here. Let's first of all look at England breaking away from the Catholic Church and how this happens. Anybody know the king? I should wait till you're not writing so you don't have an excuse to look down and act busy. Stephanie? Henry VIII. And he was not especially a good man. He wanted a divorce, and the Catholic Church wouldn't approve of it. There's some, if you ever want to study some intertwined international concerns, he had been given special permission for this thing, and there were some serious international repercussions to the Pope if he gave permission for this thing. So anyway, it all worked out. The Pope didn't give him permission to get a divorce. So basically what Henry did is he created his own church and gave himself permission. So don't try that if you want to do something in the dorm. Make your own dorm. But starting in 1531, but prior to that, he had been given permission, but been denied permission to get this divorce. Beginning in 1531, he began to maneuver things and create what becomes the Church of England, the Anglican Church. In between there, him and the Pope go back and forth, and the Pope doesn't like this. Eventually, he gets excommunicated. All right, but if he just established that he controls the way to heaven, then who cares what the Pope says? So, and if you want to try to get a final break, 1533 would probably be the final break. Starting about 1531, we see the real strife beginning, and them going back and forth. Henry VIII banishing his wife, and getting remarried, and the strife starting. But 1533, at that point, Henry VIII's been excommunicated. The communication is severed, and we have England separated from the Catholic Church. All right, so definitely it wasn't some desire to return to England to biblical Christianity. He wanted a divorce. But we do get England out of the Catholic Church. We talked about that stranglehold and the power that they had. England's out of that. Okay, not that the Anglican Church is really a whole lot different other than in spelling and that type of thing. It's much the same. All right, but they're no longer under the thumb of the Catholic Church, and that is significant. So, all right, so we have England breaking from the Catholic Church. Two more things here to mention that go along the same vein. You could put them parallel to England breaking with the Catholic Church or underneath it. Doesn't matter. Just two more things here. I want to mention the Puritans and the Separatists quickly. The Puritans and the Separatists. In time, once we get up into the 1600s, the people of England began to feel that the Anglican Church wasn't especially following the Bible, which they were right. It wasn't. It still isn't. They began to think that the Anglican Church wasn't following the Bible. No longer the Catholic Church wasn't the issue. It was this new Anglican Church that had been started. And two different groups of people form here, and the difference was, how do we address this problem? Both of them recognized that the Anglican Church was not following the Bible and needed to be fixed. The one group, the Puritans, they wanted to purify the church from within. That's often the phraseology that's used. They wanted to stay in the church and fix it. All right. The other group, the Separatists, can anybody guess what they wanted to do? If one group wanted to stay in the church, they wanted to separate from it and start their own church. They said, it's a sinking ship, too much damage to be repaired. Let's start a new church. So we have these two groups forming in England, the Puritans and the Separatists. We even see this as they come over to the colonies. some Puritans and separatist colonies. So, all right, so we get that faction. We see especially the separatists at times being persecuted in England by the Puritans and also by the Anglicans who didn't feel there was any major problem. So before we leave the Puritans and separatists, I want to mention that in time, by the time we get into the 1600s, there really ends up being 4 religious groups in England. I just mentioned 2 of them, the Puritans and the separatists. We have the Anglicans, the people that liked the Anglican Church as it was, and there was still a contingent of Catholics, just citizens who were Catholics. And through 100 years or so in the 1600s, we see different groups coming to power and trying to kill off the others. All right? And sometimes it's safe to be a Puritan, sometimes it's not. We get Bloody Mary coming in as a Catholic and wanting to kill everybody else. So we get some serious religious turmoil in England as these different groups rise to the power, or maybe a better way to say it, kings or queens come to power that favor one group or the other, and the others being bad. That leads us to 1689, the Toleration Act. This is the last thing here to look at in the Reformation. The Toleration Act in 1689. It basically tolerated all religions. It really didn't create a religious freedom. There was still a state church that was supported by the government. No longer were you required to be a member, right? You could worship outside this church without fear of being arrested and thrown in jail. But you were tolerated. That's the way to think of it. They would tolerate these other religions. So the toleration, definitely a step in the right direction. Not quite religious freedom, but a step in that direction. Okay, so the Reformation, that definitely contributed here to this exploration. So. All right, questions on those things? Maybe do something for Matthew before he falls asleep. Just don't fall this direction, you might make it into the camera. So.
When they thought that they were going to India, what mindset? Why did they think that India was over there?
Well, they didn't realize North America was there. If you kind of think of India being where North America is, that's
What made them think that it was over there?
partly their incomplete knowledge of how big the globe was.
Okay, so they didn't know like it was the other direction?
Yeah.
Well, if you
I mean, you can go around.
long enough from Spain, you will get to India eventually.
They just didn't realize how far around it was.
But if they thought it was a square,
It was a circle.
they thought it was a circle,
Yeah, by this point.
but it was flat.
It's not flat.
They thought it was flat.
No, some people, but not people of intelligence at this point. So. Okay, we're good at never minding. So. All right. So that is what took Europe from not going anywhere to all of a sudden exploring the entire world. I mean, there was a major shift here in their thinking and what they expected out of life. So. All right, what I'm going to do next is very quickly look at some of the explorers, some of the nations that went out exploring, some places they went. Not a whole lot of time. We'll go through this quickly. Some of the explorers. All right, first place to look at is Spain. Spain and Portugal are the first into the fray here with the exploration. Spain. All right, first guy to talk about is Christopher Columbus. And he makes it onto our timeline. What year is famous for Christopher Columbus? 1492. Columbus sails the ocean blue. All right, he's actually born in Italy, ends up in Spain, sails for the king and queen there, Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain. And it's 1492 that he sails and discovers the New World, lands down around Cuba and that part of the world, right where the Pope was. That's appropriate. He was just in Cuba. He didn't realize what he discovered. Really, he thought he was someplace out here. Called them Indians. You know, he was looking for a trade route. He wasn't trying to make a nice rhyme for American history students 400 years later, 1492. I got to do something. Sail the ocean blue. It wasn't his idea. He was trying to get to India, trying to get to China. And he really thought he had done it when he landed there. So 1492, he sails for the first time, comes back to Spain with souvenirs, and he's this great hero. Eventually goes back several times, but never really understands what he's discovered. So, to answer your question, I have a little side note in here. He believed in the Apocrypha. I've never read it. Someone there talks about the earth being 6 parts dry land to 1 part sea, which is almost completely backwards or worse. So they're looking at the amount of land, and they saw there's only 1 part of water for each part of land, so that it was not nearly as big as they were thinking. So there we go, from false teachings. All right, so it's 1492. Columbus sails. Doesn't realize what he did. So I have one note here that we need to at least mention. Today, in recent history at least, Columbus has been described as the author of mass genocide and power grab of land from Europe. And all right, this idea of mass genocide especially is really completely false. The argument is that he brought over all these diseases. And it's true. There were diseases that the people in the Americas had been exposed to, so they didn't have any immunities built up to them. And there were times where diseases ran wild. But to pin that on Columbus as something he did intentionally is a pretty big stretch, okay? It was going to happen, all right? It wouldn't have mattered if the Pope sent over a bunch of nuns with flowers, right? The contact was going to happen, and the disease was going to spread. I mean, it's like walking into the 5-year-old Sunday school class on a fall push day. You're going to come out with a cold. I mean, it's just, someone's going to cough on you, you're going to catch it. So it's really very unfair to pin this on Columbus, although people talk about, the populations of Central and South America being decimated, 1/3 of the people alive after he's there. And there were diseases. It did happen, but to blame him intentionally. So,
Why did they intentionally find out?
well, there's a movement today that America's always evil and bad and wicked. And here, even the guy that discovered it. No, but he discovered the New World, so he's evil and bad. Yeah. So, I have a couple of notes here that I found in another book that kind of address this whole idea. You don't have to write these down at all, but some things people do. People are trying to make Columbus look bad. One thing they do is they wildly overestimate the population of the New World. If you can claim there was, 10 million people before Columbus, and then, 50 years after Columbus, once there's more people there and we have written records and the population is a whole lot less. Well, they say, well, look, all those people died because of Columbus. But it just, they wildly overestimate it. So the deaths are wildly overestimated. These were not unique to Columbus. Again, anytime you have this type of contact, you're going to have epidemics and spreads. Anyway, the point is, don't believe it. Columbus was not this, I don't think he was a Christian as we think of it, but he was not an evil man out to wipe out the entire population of the New World in the name of trade or England or Spain or whatever. That was not the case. So, all right, Columbus, 1492. Let's go on and look at a couple other Spanish explorers before we're out of time. The next guy I look at is a man named Amerigo Vespucci. This guy. Amerigo Vespucci. This is an R. It's all being recorded too. All right, this guy eventually makes 4 trips to the New World. He's mostly known for recognizing that this was a new world. He described it this way: these regions we may rightly call Mundus Novus, which Jasmine can translate for us after 8 years of Latin. No. New world, a new world. All right, he recognizes this is not part of India, it's not part of China. This is something completely unknown. He goes on, because our ancestors had no knowledge of them. All right, I have found a continent more densely populated, more densely peopled, and abounding in animals than our Europe or Asia or Africa. All right, he was the first to realize this was a completely new place. So Amerigo Vespucci. All right, a couple other Spanish guys. Hernando Cortez. Hernando Cortez, he crosses over and conquers Mexico, or gains control of Mexico. Amerigo Vespucci lived from 1451 to 1512. I don't have the dates of his voyages. Late 1400s. I forget the dates though. Cortez in 1519 conquers Mexico. The Aztec Indians were the Indians that controlled it at that point. He was the one that they thought he was a god. So, he convinces them to give him all this gold and stuff, and then he kills them. So conquers them, just straight conquering. Another guy, Ponce de Leon. I've got to mention him because he's kind of funny. Ponce de Leon. This guy travels around Florida, southern United States, down in this area. He was searching for the fountain of youth. And the Indians, we talk about these stupid native Indians, they used him poorly. He would go asking about this fountain of youth and say, oh yeah, it's just over there. And they kept leading him on this wild goose chase. He never found it, obviously. But the Indians never told him that it wasn't there. They just kept telling him, well, it's just across the hill over there. Just keep looking. So, Ponce de Leon. Next guy, Hernando de Soto. De Soto. He went across the southern United States to the Mississippi, discovered the Mississippi River. How many of these do you want to do? We got to do this guy. Balboa. I don't have a first name. I think that's his last name. Balboa. Not him. Different guy. This guy crossed the Isthmus of Panama, and he was the first to see the Pacific Ocean. First European to see it. He was sad. You have to put in perspective. They were trying to get to India, and he's the first to realize that, wait, there's another major ocean here. It's not. We can't just keep pressing through these islands and get there, but there's another major ocean. So Balboa, Juan Cabrillo. These are all basically in chronological order. He claimed California, or what is now California, for Spain. That was 1542, if you want a date for that one. Okay, and there's others, but they go all over. Primarily this direction. All the green here is the Spanish explorers. So, let me mention one thing, just kind of a general statement about the Spanish colonies that form here, and that they were generally very slow to grow. If you think about, once we get to American history, and these colonies being started, and they very quickly grow in size and riches and power in a dominant position in North America, that never happens with the Spanish colonies. And at the heart of it, there's multiple factors, but at the heart of it is the government structure that they established. It had strict government control of the economy. Does anybody know the term at this point for the government-controlled economy? What's that? Mercantilism was the name of the structure, the economic theory where the government controlled and manipulated the economy. Spain implemented that strictly, and it stifled the free market, stifled the growth. Mercantilism, mercantilism. We will talk about mercantilism by itself in a little bit, but they implement it there. When you think of mercantilism, think government control of the economy. That's what it is, mercantilism. Okay, so those are some Spanish explorers. Let's quickly mention just a couple Portuguese explorers. All right, the first guy is called Prince Henry the Navigator. That tells you a whole lot about him. He was a prince, and he was a navigator. He was a member of the nobility, the son of the king, and he was very interested in sailing and navigation. He established a school to teach people how to sail and how to navigate on the ocean, and they experimented and developed new ways. So anyway, was very much concerned with that. He himself did a little bit of exploration. The Portuguese, initially for sure, headed south around Africa. We see them pushing this direction. And Prince Henry himself traveled this way some. Basically, the Portuguese just slowly creep down. The next explorer will go a little bit further than the previous. And eventually they make it all the way around and up to India. But he started to push this direction, Prince Henry. He eventually, I forget the details now, he was in Africa and disappears. And there's this legend that he didn't really die, and he was going to show back up in Portugal at some point in history. If you like conspiracies, you can find them pretty much anywhere in history. They're everywhere. So, all right, Prince Henry the Navigator. He actually was early on. He died in 1460, if you don't believe the legends. 1394 to 1460, so even before Columbus, he was beginning to push south here. All right, the next guy also predates Columbus, Bartholomew Diaz, D-I-A-S. In 1487, he sailed around the tip of Africa. And then turns around and comes back. And then the last guy from Portugal to mention is Vasco da Gama. Here's his last name. He makes it all the way to India. And that year was 1498. All the way around up to India, 1498. All right, so Spain and England, wow. Spain and Portugal. They were the early players here in the exploration field. Portugal actually starting before Spain, but Spain very quickly catching up. And you can see there the places that they explore and colonize, major portions of the earth. We're going to eventually, once we get to the Spanish Armada, the King of Spain controls both Portugal and Spain. So if you think about all that territory under his control, and this little pipsqueak England run by a woman, thinks they're going to pester him. And he sends the Spanish Armada after England, and England wins. So that's one of those points in history where England should have been thumped, and it goes the other direction. So, all right, one last thing we need to look at before we finish up, and it's the line of demarcation. I have Spain and then Portugal and line of demarcation. The line of demarcation. We have here two Catholic countries competing to explore and find territory first and find the best trade routes first and all that kind of good stuff. So what happens here is the Pope comes in and divides the world in two and gives one half to Portugal and the other half to Spain. All right. That division initially comes in 1493. There's another in time as the map of the world, we can know a little more of it, it gets shifted a little bit. But 1493, we have this initial line of demarcation drawn, and England or Spain and Portugal getting opposite sides. Portugal got everything to the east of it. Now this map is very tough to, here's South America. The line went north and south this direction, so something like that. It cut off the tip of South America. And the eastern tip of South America and everything east of that was for Portugal. And everything to the west was given to Spain. And you can see that Portugal dominates to the east and Spain to the west. They did not know exactly what all was there. So if you're looking at it and saying, wow, that's not a fair split, they didn't know. But that was drawn by the Pope, splitting this up between these two faithful, loyal Catholic nations.
What year was that?
1493 was the initial. So eventually, England comes along, and they don't care what the Pope says. Okay, they go to North America. They don't care which side of the line they're on because they're not Catholic. So, but anyway, at this point, the world is divided between these two nations at the line of demarcation. Anybody really want the name of the Pope? Justin's saying absolutely not. Okay, Alexander VI, if you want it. So. All right, we will on Thursday continue looking at the exploration. We need to talk about the Spanish Armada. We'll talk about French and English explorers. And we'll also talk about the test that is a week from Thursday. But we will pick that up then. So, all right, you're dismissed.